Welcome to your Artsy Girl podcast. I am your host, Christina Curator. This is a podcast about art, poetry, writing, and anything about creativity. Sit back, relax, and get your dose of brain food to get your creative juices flowing. Welcome to episode 58. Today's featured guest is Angela M. Brommel. She is a Nevada writer with Iowa roots. In 2018, her chapbook, Plutonium and Platinum Blonde, was published by Serving House Books. Her poetry has been published in the Best American Poetry blog, the North American Review, the Literary Review's Share, and many other journals and anthologies. A 2018 Red Rock Canyon Artist in Residence, Angela served as the inaugural poet of the program. She earned an MFA in creative writing from Antioch University and an MA in theater from the University of Northern Iowa. Mojave in July is her debut full-length poetry collection. Angela is the executive director of the Office of the Arts and Culture, as well as affiliate faculty in humanities at Nevada State College. You can also find her at the Citron Review as editor-in-chief. Everyone, please welcome my next featured guest, Angela M. Brommel. Hi, Angela. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm fine. Welcome to the show. So how's it out there in Nevada? Las Vegas, to be exact?
I'm just outside of Las Vegas in Henderson, but, I see people when I go out walking, of course, being careful around other people, but, people are still, walking with their families, right, holding hands. And it's okay.
Yeah. And then that's, I'm going to ask you a little later about how you are holding up during the crisis we are having here with COVID-19 and how you are creating and all that. But before we get into all that and into your work, tell us where you're from and where you grew up.
I'm originally from Des Moines, Iowa. And I moved to Las Vegas in 2002 and then later moved into Henderson. So I've been here almost 18 years and now it really feels like home.
Yeah, when you stay in one spot for a while, it grows on you.
It's interesting. I find I write about both places. I write about both places often and as if they're home. And I still refer to both of them as home.
Me too. And as a military brat, I have several homes. Well, so you are primarily a poet, writer, or both?
Recently, I've been mostly a poet, but I do some nonfiction writing, and I have a master's where I did some playwriting. So I consider myself a writer in general, but poetry seems to be closest to my heart.
Right. So you've trained in playwriting, right?
I did. I studied some playwriting at the University of Northern Iowa, and that was where I first took college creative writing classes too, over in the English department. And as I mentioned in my letter to you, I also studied with Vince Gutierrez, who at the time was at the North American Review.
Vince Gutierrez, yes, he's a prominent Filipino-American poet, which I haven't yet gotten on the show, but he's on the list. If he is hearing, if he's listening, rather.
Opportunity. Yeah, it was a great opportunity to study with him in the classroom, but then also learn about the business of writing and the business of editing firsthand at the North American Review.
Where do you generally get your ideas for a play?
No, I have not written plays since that time. But I think with the playwriting sort of uniquely, one of the things I was doing was journaling every day and especially writing down my dreams. And then I would use them as writing prompts.
Okay.
And so it's something I've been thinking about picking up again because there's so many great ideas that come to us either in the middle of the night or first thing when you wake up in the morning and you think they'll stick with you. And then later in the day, all you have left is, I had some really great ideas. Right. So try to develop those habits again.
Yeah, I feel that, and I could be wrong, but to me, when I think of playwriting, I think it's more in line with, current issues or social issues of the day or the past, with, historical context. You could explore a lot with that. But I'm sure, like with anything, with any genre, there's hybrids of sorts. And, people push the boundaries, so to speak. And so when did you discover poetry and started writing poetry then?
I started with poetry first. I think first I started as just an avid reader from an early age. And when I was very young, still lived with my grandmother. And in the morning, when she finished a section of the newspaper, she would hand it over to me. And so I grew up with everyone in the house sort of reading one section of the newspaper, then it went to the next person. And I'm not really sure who did it first, but then my grandmother started saying, I have some scraps of paper if you want to write something. And then my parents, So then my parents started giving me notebooks and pads of paper. And so I really don't remember a time when I wasn't a writer,
Right.
but we didn't call it that. So I didn't have this thought of, I want to be a writer. It was simply something that was being done every day in the house. Yeah.
Yeah. So did you grow up in a kind of creative type or artistic family?
It's funny. I think so. And again, I think you don't know it until you start telling those stories to other people.
Right.
So my mother did some drawing and some sketching sometimes, but she didn't make a big deal about it. She sort of would do it, put it to the side. Very creative that way in terms of making things different and new, like repainting something. My grandmother cooked a lot, and I think that cooking is really creative, that kind of experimentation and trying things. But I think the environment encouraged being creative because many of my cousins also ended up as writers and visual artists. So it's only been recently that I've started thinking we just had so much freedom to be creative, but we weren't talking about it. Just things were always there to try.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's how I did with my children growing up when they were kids. I'd expose them to, drag them along to galleries, to readings and things like that. So it's just, a part of us. And so, and not surprising that they grew up as being artists and writers themselves. So, so being open, experimental, opening yourself to possibilities.
Having the tools there. Yeah.
I'm sorry, say again?
I'm sorry. And having the tools there. So having paper, pens. I noticed that you're also a visual artist. So I think the more we put those things in front of us, the more likely it is that we'll make something. It sounds so simple, but the first thing is having the things near you.
Right. Yes, definitely. The tools to create, as well as being open to the creating things as well. Okay. Well, I understand that you have a new collection, a poetry collection.
I do. Thank you. It's Mojave in July, put out by Tolson Books. And the cover art is by Sue Limbert, which was really amazing. She created it specifically based on the content inside the book. We didn't just pull it from the stuff that she had. I was really honored that she made something new and beautiful.
It is beautiful. Yes. And I will post that up too on the website so everybody can see.
Thank you.
Yeah. So who are your earlier influences then, like with writing and poetry?
Well, I think the first way that I really discovered poetry, because first I was reading a lot of fiction, was a school librarian. And I think I went into the library one morning and I said, I was looking for a book. She said, do you know what you're looking for? And And I don't think I did. Or, maybe I asked her something that was similar to something I'd asked her every week. But she took me over to the poetry section and she handed me Gwendolyn Brooks.
Oh my goodness.
All these people. And I was in 5th grade. So that was a lot. But something really opened in a completely different way. And so then I started reading everything she sent my direction. And I started with, from there it went to the typical ones that you hear often in the very beginning, Sylvia Plath, Anne Sexton. But when I studied with Vince at the University of Northern Iowa, he introduced us to so many writers that I had never heard of. And at that time, I was really struck by the work of Brenda Shaughnessy. And we read work by Leanne Roripaugh. And both of them are still my favorites. I was thinking, this is always a hard question.
I know.
It's so hard. But if you wake up in the middle of the night and you can't sleep and you go down the stairs, whose book do you grab? And I still grab those two often. I still grab Adrienne Rich, Sharon Olds, Mary Oliver. But most of all, just continuing to read as much as possible to learn new people. And then, you have favorites for the things you're going through at certain times, and then some that are just favorites forever.
Right. Absolutely. And with me, I try to keep up with my reading just by, supporting my friends, my writer friends, and buying and reading their books and keeping tapped in with the literary community that way. Do you have a couple of poems you'd like to share with us?
Sure, I would love to.
Okay.
I think I'll read 2. And the first one, I like to tell people, I studied at the University of Antioch in Los Angeles, and we took a section on translation. And obviously not everyone can translate work because we don't have a second language, or we don't have enough of a mastery in a second language. But we had an amazing instructor who did. And so she would give us the basics and then, tell us about the writer and have us work on it. And one of the exercises we did was take the poem the whole way through until you had adapted it to something that matched more of your experience or your knowledge base. So I took a poem by Catullus, and I line by line translated it or updated it, however you like to say it, into a poem about loving Nevada. And that's really where a lot of my poems came from, was this desire to look at the place where I was living differently instead of always looking back to where I had come from. So this one is called Catullus number 7, as her answer from Valley of Fire, which is a park we have here. How many of my kisses would it take to satisfy you, you ask, as your mouth grazes the back of my knee? As many as the grains of Mojave sand that lie between the basin and range, national parks, and a tiny cabin in Searchlight, in the sun-scorched canyon near the hot springs, and in the fire-kissed valley of the petroglyphs at dusk, or in the discarded clothes in a 2-person tent with instant soup and a game of dirty Yahtzee. As many as these grains of sand dance among the Joshua trees, or as many as the stars, night unmoving, gazing down on this secret desire, as many of your kisses kissed are enough and more for love-drunk me. I can't be counted by X's nor a careless word between us.
Thank you. I noticed you mentioned Yahtzee. You said you said dirty Yahtzee even?
Dirty Yahtzee. Yeah, that's it was really interesting to work with this poem for a lot of reasons, because if you look at the original, it's the same story in line by line. And so then I had to think of, how can we say the exact same thing differently? I don't remember what it is in the original. I know. So whenever someone in the audience asks me, how do you play dirty Yahtzee? I say, I'm not sure how the speaker says this. But it was a really interesting exercise to look at a place that you think you know, but look at it differently by telling it in a new story.
That is an interesting exercise. Yes. And so your collection, Mojave in July, correct? Mojave in July. It's based on living in Nevada?
They are. It's a mix. Mojave in July is a mixture of a couple different tracks of stories. It opens with a story about my grandmother's mother, who had been a chorus girl at the Princess Theater in the early 1920s. And incidentally, that's the poem that Vince in the North American Review published. And so it was very special to me, so I put it first. But I sort of took my grandmother's stories about dancers and movies and things like that. And then I moved to Nevada, and I was really interested in the history of shows on the Strip and things like that. And then with the image of Miss Atomic popping up all of the time. And so there's some pop culture, sometimes adoration and sometimes critique of how women have been represented everywhere, I guess. But at the same time, what happened is I started hiking a bit, and this changed how I looked at everything around me. And so there's a lot of nature poems in here, but there's also a lot of film work, art poems, really, really a fun mix in that way. And I was really glad that the publisher let me, sort of venture off that way.
Well, I think, your poems from your grandmother's story regarding the 1920s and I think of film noir, something like Cabaret or something like that. So, I think it goes well with, what we think of Las Vegas.
One of the things that I hoped as we did it is, as you read along, people start to read these poems and realize that the Miss Atomic in this poem and that poem are maybe not the person that they thought she was. And it sort of shifts as you go through the book. It was fun. It was fun to, I guess this is going back to something. When I was studying with Vince, he had Marvin Bell come and read to us. And he read some of his Book of the Dead Man poems. And so I have told some people that I feel like my Miss Atomic poems are sort of with a nod to that, in the sense of what happens when we have this character that allows us to make them different in each poem, but also use them as a way to ask social questions. So it was a way for me to have fun with the stories that my grandmother had told me, but also look more deeply at the people that really live here.
Awesome. Do you have another poem you'd like to share with us?
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think I'll read the title poem, Mojave in July. And I think, again, I had lived here for a while, and I noticed that every time I was outside and I was looking, I thought I knew what I was looking at. And I would say, but everything is so brown here. So, there's no grass, which is not true. There's grass. And so one summer I decided that if I was going to live here, that I needed to really fall in love with it. And so I needed to learn to see it differently. And so this is Mojave in July. You can't explain to friends from home how the desert makes it better, but you try. Imagine a heat so dry that it presses down into the earth, releasing its scent so that it takes on the comforting smell of clay pots in your grandmother's kitchen when you were a child, or your hideout under the evergreens, where you used to sit for hours smelling only the dirt, the sap, the pine. Imagine a smell that reminds you of the kitchen on holidays, sage, rosemary, and something you chase that is reminiscent of honey that feels like love. Some people still fight it, They call the heat oppressive. They call it unrelenting. They have not yet learned how to live within it. You must learn to smell the water beneath the surface. You must learn to let the heat pass through you, warming your bones, your ligaments, and all the pieces that you call you. Let the heat draw out everything unneeded. Let it put you to bed midday. Let it make you new.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you gave me a copy of your collection, and I did read some of the poems, and they are definitely lovely, lovely, lovely. And now, so you are also a editor-in-chief at the Citron Review?
I am for about 5 years now.
Did you start the literary review?
I didn't start it. The really wonderful thing is it was a group of friends that started it 10 years ago last fall.
Okay.
And they all graduated from Antioch. And then over the years, it's sort of rotated through different groups of friends. And so I've been with them the last 5 years. And last fall, we celebrated our 10-year anniversary and put out an anthology. And we read almost year round.
Yeah, I've heard of you guys. In fact, I don't know if I submitted.
But you should. Everybody should. Yeah.
So any particular kind of work you guys are lean to, or? Primarily,
we deal with brief work, which is really nice. I just was talking with people recently. We look at micro, flash, and nonfiction, poetry, regular fiction. We just started doing book reviews. So that is new. We've reviewed 2 books so far, but we're really liking it. So look out for more of those.
What's down the pike for you? I mean, are you working on new projects now?
I recently curated an exhibition through Nevada Humanities called Margaret, Are You Grieving? And it's an exhibition of visual and written work by artists reflecting on how they process grief and how grief impacts their work.
Wow.
And it's really amazing. It's so amazing. And it really touched me and changed me in ways that I knew it would have an impact, but I didn't know how big of one. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, when the shelter in place suggestions came in, that exhibit went from being up 8 weeks to still being up. So it's been online this whole time. And so I've had an opportunity to see more people in the public interact with it, hear from more artists who have said, I wish I knew about this because I would love to be a part of this. And so I feel like it's like it is for all of us that work about grief and loss is something that, I used to think, well, eventually we'll let it go, or eventually we'll get over it, or, and then you start dealing with the topic and working with it artistically, and you realize how it's just not true. That these things are always with us. Mm-hmm. It's so healing to be at the opening and have artists stand up. And the work didn't necessarily have to be about something related to their grief. Mm-hmm. But it was created during a time period that they were grieving or reflecting on that. And this kind of goes back to the reference I made to Brenda Shaughnessy, is that I remember studying in school both times and always wondering about what it is about the things we can't explain, the things that are too much. And so we end up working with the image differently, developing new words, making up our own words, because there isn't enough to explain all of the feelings that we're having. So it was really powerful to be in a room with other artists who were sharing how they had been transformed by these experiences, and yet we were still all here.
Well, I got a chance to look it up, and I see it online. Oh, it's
Oh, wow.
amazing. Yeah. Margaret, Are You
Thank you.
Grieving? And it's nevadahumanities.org. You can Google it. And you created it. You curated it.
Thank you. So I guess that's my next project is I feel like there's so much more to work with in this topic. And so I would love to maybe do an anthology or maybe do some nonfiction writing myself. I've kept pretty close to poetry, but I would be interested in talking more about that because at the end of the night, when we all walked away, people were smiling, and all of us were saying how good it was just to be with someone else. No apologies. Right. This is who I am. Yeah.
Right. This exhibit, of course, was up before the pandemic. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
So speaking of which, how are you doing personally as well as creatively? Are you able to create during this time?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I think I'm doing well, considering. So far I've I guess it's so funny. I'm not ready for this question yet.
I know. I know. It's weird, huh?
It's so weird. It's so weird. And I also think there's still a lot of trepidation about monitoring that or how do we talk about it? And, going back to the exhibit on grief, one of the things I was having a conversation with a friend and we said, what's hard is so many people are in pain and grief and loss, all for different reasons, so all for really different reasons. And, we're trying to care for people and we're trying to care for ourselves. And so one of the first things I did was actually told myself that I didn't have to write for a couple weeks. I took a couple weeks to not write because I thought, I don't know if I'm ready to process what's happening. But I know what I do need to do is stay connected to other people and stay connected to a certain amount of routine or paying attention. Going back to paying attention. So I've done some things. I've taken some online drop-in poetry workshops. I did some yoga that way. Even as simple as sending cards, sending postcards or things to friends to stay in the habit of doing regular connection too, not just reaching out because we think something is wrong, but just reaching out so that we're not all alone, even though we're alone in our houses. That it's the weirdest thing. It's the weirdest thing.
It is the weirdest thing. And, even though you're in the land of sunshine and it's hot and it's hot here in Florida and we're in the land of sunshine as well. And it's so bizarre. Going out in the backyard is probably, it feels so safe, but going out there, and I have a lot of trepidation as well. I mean, especially with safety. I mean, you see a lot of people without masks and going about their business like there's nothing going on. There's nothing happening. I force myself to kind of like stay in my cocoon and try to keep me and my family safe, stay safe. But how much of it becomes obsessive? How much of it is, forced anxiety, or is it, I just don't know. I mean, and I do the same with you. I mean, I try to reach out to, writer friends and artist friends. And that's great advice, by the way, to keep connected in that sense. I haven't yet done any of the online writing or that community. But since you mentioned it, it really I think that's helped. A great idea.
Yeah. 2 weeks ago, I did an introductory session and a little mini writing session with, there's a national group called Women Who Submit, and then they have state and local chapters. But
I'm sorry, say again, Women Who what?
It's called Women Who Submit. And it's a nonprofit out of LA. Their sole mission is helping women get their work out there and published. So you can also start local chapters too. Nice. But it was really great. It was good to do that. And, as for the anxiety part of it, I think one thing I try to focus on is we don't know everything. But lately I'd also been thinking about my grandmother, her mother, who it's the first poem in the book, Chorus Girl. I was thinking that the photos that I have of her happened right after the 1918 pandemic.
No kidding.
And there's something about that that reminds me that somehow that she continued, and then my grandmother happened, and then my father happened. And so I try to quiet myself and think, to be patient, to do the things that I know I can do, and to concentrate on reading books by my friends, meeting up online, asking if people need things. And I've also been really moved as people have asked me if I needed things and have done things for me. One day my doorbell rang and I went outside, and I'm gluten-free and dairy-free. And so it was really sweet. My friend's children left gluten-free, dairy-free cookies on my doorstep. Just two. and they probably live like 35-minute drive.
Oh, how sweet.
And there was just something about it. Like, that's just so sweet. So all these ways that we can be kind to the people that we love, and then also kind to people that we don't know, but everybody's loved by somebody. So yeah.
Well, good. How about new writing? You've been doing any?
A little, yeah. So I took an online workshop last week with Gail Brandeis.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if you personally know Gail or if you've interviewed her.
I think I have her on my Facebook. She's a Facebook friend.
Yeah.
I didn't meet her personally.
Yeah. She had us write a poem, something small about something that we were now more aware of because we're home, like something like a poem of appreciation about your eyeglasses, or I think I ended up writing a poem about all the beans I have. But the exercise was really about turning our attention to the immediate in front of us, and finding a way to focus on that. And I think that's what I'm doing right now is small work. So just a few sentences, just a few thoughts. And then we'll see what happens. The other day I thought, well, maybe I'm going to get out the drawing paper. I haven't drawn anything in years, but, just to do, as I said in the beginning, if you put the tools out, you will use them. And I think then you remember how much you like doing things that you haven't done in a really long time.
Well, that's the thing. I think my writing has been suppressed only because, everything's so immediate. And like I said, with anxiety and everything. So what I have done, though, is, turning to visual arts, because that to me, even though I can't articulate it in words, that's how I can express in another way. And interestingly enough, I've created 2 series called the Quarantine series, of course, which I do abstract expressionism.
I saw them.
Oh,
yeah.
So, yeah, and I actually sent them out for publication, and one literary art magazine published the one series. I guess that's the beauty of being able to work, be open to other genres of artistic expression, Anyway, any thoughts, any parting words?
I guess this is a nice tie-in for both of us. I did look at your work before and I loved it and it was beautiful. And, people often think that because I write that I would go to writing first when I'm looking for something. But visual work does something completely different for me. Like some of my most creative moments happen after walking through a gallery or a museum or seeing somebody's work online. So when I saw your pieces, I love them because that abstract quality is a kind of small poem. I think that it's a good time to explore a medium that maybe you love, but you don't think of it as yours. And even if you aren't able to do that, incredibly comforting, but it also might inspire like a new set of works for you that we're always in conversation. As I mentioned, like with Sue's cover on my book, I was so touched that she took the work and she made something with it. In the same sense, I've always loved Sue's work, and it makes me want to write about the worlds that she creates. And I guess that's, then we don't have to worry about doing what we've always done, you know? Yeah.
Well, we do have similarities as far as being, I consider us both being curators of some sort. And that is another way of being art activists. You know, you present and support other artists and writers through your exhibits and through your anthologies and your literary art magazine. I think it's all a part of being an artist and a writer. I mean, it's more than just, I write a poem, I write poetry. I think it's an existence. I think it's a way of life.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you for coming on the show, and let me know, what you're doing, what you're up to.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
So, Angela, where can people go and find your work?
You can find the book at tolsonbooks.com, which is the publisher's site, or at the Writer's Block, our local bookstore in Las Vegas. And it's also online at Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
Well, everyone, that is it for now. Please tune in next week for my next featured guest. In the meantime, have a productive and creative week. Bye, Angela.
Bye.